This path is about courage. All about courage. There are times where it may seem soft and tender and nicely rounded and softened at the edges. But let's not fool ourselves, because it is very, very intentionally oriented. What I mean by that is, intentions have to be constantly checked, our intentions, while we are practicing, while we are living this path, because to my understanding, this path can only be lived. We cannot just be believers of it. We cannot just be the reciters of some sutta, some favorite saying of the Buddha, or some interesting aphorism, or some funny story, or something that moved us at one point or another. Those are nice. Those are helpful to remind us, to kind of get us back on track when life gets hard and difficult. But let's, again, not fool ourselves. It requires our fullest attention. In the Majjhima Nikaya, the middle-length discourses, Sutta number 22, there's a very powerful sutta. It's called the Alagadupama Sutta, the snake, or the water snake sutta. If we know anything about Discovery Channel or Planet Earth, or, we've done biology and we know a little bit about herpetology, we know that water snakes have the quality of being one of the most, if not the most, poisonous snake out there. Snakes. They're very slippery, sometimes look very docile. However, they can kill with a single bite. They have to, because their preys are very slippery themselves. They're fish, so they have to make sure that the one shot they get is a good one. Now, when I first came across the sutta, I thought it was, talking about the sensual pleasures, lust and things like that. Because as some of you might know, that the suttas that we have today usually started with an instigator, a story, something that was happening in the background. So apparently there was this monk who was walking around and just saying, who had studied the suttas, who had been, alive at the time of the Buddha, attended his talks and all that, who was saying that the Buddha's emphasis on staying away from obstructions such as kama, or lust, or sensual pleasures, you know what, it's not necessarily, it shouldn't be called an obstacle in itself. Basically, it's okay to be lustful, it's okay to go after pleasure. And this was a monk, somebody with 227 precepts daily that they had to follow. So some of his contemporaries, some of the monks that were hearing him do this, they were just like, or say this, is like, you shouldn't misrepresent the Lord like this. This is not right. After hearing him, after listening to him. But back in the day, there was a sense of accountability in the Sangha. Today, it's a lot more lax because of the planet being in this state, because you have tiny little temples here and there isn't that cohesiveness as it used to be at the time of the Buddha. At least when it came to adhering to the Vinaya rules. So they went straight to the Buddha after attempting several times of kind of getting him back on track. And the Buddha says, okay, let him know that the teacher calls you. And when you heard that, it's interesting, right? What goes on in the mind of the person who's about to approach the Buddha. So this monk approaches the Buddha, and the Buddha never ever scolded someone just like that, or even tried to criticize them before hearing their side, giving them the opportunity to present what they think about and what they have been called there for. So the Buddha asks him, "What is this true? What you're saying?" And the guy says, "Yeah, I think there is no difference between, there shouldn't be this view that lust and sensual desires are obstructions as such. They're not on the path." At that point, once it's confirmed, that's when the Buddha goes ahead and, he had his funny ways of labeling such a person, or just telling them, misguided man. When did you hear me ever give such a talk where I equated Nibbana being the same as being, one who follows your senses, your sensual desires? When have you heard me say that? Where have I said that? And when it's the teacher talking, you listen, and the man just hangs his head, knowing that, At that point, the Buddha starts talking about the Alagadupama Sutta, which is the snake simile. So the snake is not necessarily to be seen from this story, the bit about sensual lust. It's in fact the Dhamma that the Buddha is resembling it to a water snake. And that got my attention. Especially when we know that the water snake is a very, very, very poisonous, powerful phenomenon. So I had to negotiate in my head what the Buddha was trying to say, so I kept reading on. It's the easiest thing to build ourselves an image that we understand the Dhamma for ourselves or for others. It's the easiest thing in the world for us to convince ourselves that we know the Dhamma, or that we might even be practicing the Dhamma. But when we are holding on to the tail end of the snake, you know what's going to happen. And that's what the Buddha talks about. He says, like an ignorant person who reaches over and tries to hold on to the body of the snake or the tail of the snake turns its head and bites the person's hand or any other body limb and kills the guy, kills the person who's approaching it, because they didn't have the necessary respect for the animal. So there's a way to approach a venomous snake. He even talks about, having this crooked piece of wood. You can actually put it on gently place it there, and then you can go ahead and hold on to the head of the snake. And that's where you can extract the venom and use it as a antidote, as medicine. They use modern medicine for a long time. Actually, has been using it for medicines. So that's where we can actually look at the Dhamma as from its medicinal qualities that could come and change our world, our lives. Because ultimately we need to think about what it is that we want to get out of this practice. Tell people that, I'm a meditator. I'm a yogi. I take the 5 precepts. I take the 8 precepts. I take 10 precepts. I have an interesting name that was given to me. All these things, they're wonderful. They're part of the sasana, fine, but they're very superficial when approached as such. See, mediocre intentions will give us mediocre results. Mediocre understanding of the teachings will give us similar results. And we are living at a time period that is, to my mind, is like the epitome of mediocrity. However, we have this wonderful practice, wonderful teaching that sometimes I'm noticing that is being downgraded to fit our own understanding of life and how much we need to strive in our practice. See, many of us in today's society have more of a respect towards our investments, financial investments, than we do about this practice. And that's problematic for me. As subjects, we actually hold on to math principles with much more reverence than we do with the teachings. So when I ask a person, what do you understand by right view, or right lifestyle, or right effort, or right mindfulness, right meditation, or right concentration? Oh, you're talking about my Eightfold Path, yes. How do you see that being in somewhat, coherence with your life? How do you utilize that? And oftentimes you have this haze over the person's face. But when I ask them about some basic, pragmatic parts of their lives, let's say, how much do you think you're going to make your rent or mortgage this month? Immediately they'll do the number in their heads. They're like, yeah, I'm coming out short by $5, so I have to do this, or I got this, or I have this much money, so I can go and buy this. There's this very, I wouldn't say serious necessarily, but very much of a dedicated approach to that superficial part of their lives. So that is, I hope that kind of gets you to where I am, when I say that there's a sense of mediocrity in our approach towards the Dhamma. One of the sayings in the Dhammapada goes something like this: seeing the unessential as essential and seeing the essential as unessential is the epitome of ignorance. And that's, again, hinting at what I'm trying to express to you today, leave you with today. Is there a seriousness to it? Absolutely. But can we see a child, a newborn baby? See, I've been an uncle several times over. The first time I became an uncle was when my niece was born in '89. And my sister, she came back from the hospital after staying there for a while, and they handed me my niece. And I held her. I still have a picture of it. My sister took it. I held my niece so carefully, so tenderly, but very intently, because, you're afraid you might drop the child. I was like, oh, that's impossible. I won't let that happen. I won't let that happen. So I'm making sure that, but I'm not squeezing her either. I'm there, fully there, intentionally present. So in a way, I'm very serious to protect her, to hold her. And that's one of the most beautiful pictures I have seen from my past. And it's still stamped in my mind. And this is an image I also get when I look at the Dhamma. See, being attached to the literal meanings of things is always dangerous. That kind of puts us in the area of fundamentalism of some sort. But going to the opposite extreme is similarly dangerous. That is holding on to the tail end of the water snake. Now the reason I say this is because on the internet and all around the world today you have all kinds of teachers popping out of the woodworks. Good for them, I guess. However, we have to be very, very careful and cautious. You know, this cat that just passed by, so intense, so careful. If you ever noticed a cat walk, each of the paws, you might see the cat looking somewhere else, but you know the way he or she is walking, there's intention, and he or she can stop at any moment. There's that alertness that you see in the animal, but you don't see it in practitioners. The symbols, the images, the lessons, the teachings are all around us. They're all around us. And how much of that is being applicable in our lives? That is what I'm trying to say. We have divested ourselves of the interest to become interested in ourselves. We are completely like disinterested in maintaining the sense of awareness, who and what we are and what are we doing with the choices that we make. And our attention is always broadcast outward, outward, outward. This person, that system, that regime, that situation. Meanwhile, dukkha abounds. You know, the third noble truth happens to be dukkha nirodha, the cessation of dukkha. The first being dukkha, dukkha. Then is dukkha samudaya, which is the cause of dukkha, or suffering, or unsatisfactoriness, etc. And then there's the third one. That's the third noble truth. The Buddha, for 45 years of his work, he was constantly asked, what is your teaching? Or his students would be asked, and they would always say the same thing, if they had been listening, unlike that other monk. The teacher only teaches suffering and the ending of suffering. That has to be there. Otherwise, you know, we're doomed, right? So the ending of suffering is what we look at when we're looking at the third noble truth. And when you look at the word nirodha, ni is a prefix that usually denotes a negation, the anti or none of this. So when you look at rodha, it's similar to, the meaning comes very close to a prison, a jail cell, an entrapment, a prison. So nirodha is a release from that. No more prison. In movies, I've seen, you know, how some prisoners, you've probably seen this in like Shawshank Redemption and things, where they have posters, these jail cells, where these prisoners, to kind of get a glimpse or kind of a whiff of freedom, they might get, for good behavior or whatever, some posters, and they could place them on the walls to kind of feel that they're out there. They're still kind of have access to the world outside of the walls, outside of the gates, the barbed wire. So they can join in with the real world. But they're just posters, paper and ink and color. They're not the real thing. Holding on to the teachings, or knowing a few verses here and there, or maybe even being able to recite the whole suttas, knowing everything about the Buddha, having degrees and whatever, titles, without the practice. Calling ourselves Buddhists without the practice is like staying in that jail cell, looking over and just being mesmerized by those posters and saying, yeah, I know freedom. I know Nibbana. That's fooling ourselves. And this path is not about fools. It's not about foolishness. And that's why I said the first sentence, which is, this path is about courage. It has a no-nonsense approach. It's so alive, it's so colorful, it's so fresh. But it requires our fullest attention in order for it to be so. And no one's going to do it for us. Nobody's going to do that for us. You know, as you know, my day job being a therapist, you see clients all the time, and they come with tormented pasts. Some of them are quite tormented even while being in the session. And over a length of time, you do provide interventions and tools, ways for them to actually start to apply some of these things that you offer them, having heard where they're coming from. And as professionals, as empathic professionals, we have to provide them that safety, and also to allow them, to give them something they could use when they go back out of that safe environment of a session room. Many of the clients respond beautifully, but it's not because of the therapist. The therapist's job is within the confines of the session, as far as that sense of alliance and bonding and bridge building goes. However, when that person, when that patient or the client is out there in the world, how much of that trust that is being carried over? How much of the trust is kind of seeping into the tool that you gave them, and they're starting to rely on what they felt and sensed, and then saying, okay, I'm going to try this, I'm going to trust him, I'm going to do it, I'm going to try, and then they start doing it by adding drop by drop of those beautiful intentions. And that's where the paradigm shift slowly takes place. Insight could even happen. And that's where you know that the shackles of the prison are slowly coming off. But it requires ongoing effort. Now, you've also seen, heard, read about people who say, oh, my therapist, you know. Okay, how many years have you been going to see the therapist? Like 22 years? Why? It's not working. Don't do it. Something is wrong. At least switch. But you don't understand the bond we have. He understands, she understands me so well. It's not working. You could have bought 3 houses with that money. Especially if it's psychoanalysis. But, you know. Something is wrong. So I would encourage that person to check in with themselves to see what is the intention to go and knock on that therapist's door every single week. Why? See, the level of comfort that we have is so enticing. As I was driving here today, I saw the image in my mind of a little infant. Let's call that infant my niece. And I remember she would have these toys dangling in midair over her bed that she would use her hands and just like look at her, you know, these toys, colorful, some of them made sounds. And sometimes I've noticed that with meditators, where they might have an experience, they might have this calm feeling here and there. I'm experiencing the first jhana, yes. I have an insight now, yes, you shouldn't talk to me, get an appointment, because now I'm a higher being. It's like those toys. There's no difference. How has it gotten you close to the ending of suffering? That is the ultimate litmus test. The ultimate litmus test. Nirodha has to be there. Some people throw philosophical jargon at me and say, samsara, nirvana, the same things. I said, no, they're not. Otherwise the Buddha would never have taught it for 45 years. You don't understand the meaning behind that statement. See, Mara is very cunning. In Buddhism we have a Mara. It's not exactly the same as Satan in Judeo-Christian religions, but he pretty much does almost the same things as far as getting you sidetracked from your path. So we have to be quite diligent in checking in and checking into our own intentions behind why we are doing things, why we are saying things, why we are thinking certain things. It's called the three trainings in a sense. Sila, Samadhi, and Panya. Sila is the virtue or discipline, having a virtuous life, with yourself at least. Samadhi is the cultivation of your mind. Checking in. How many of us here can actually know what our thoughts are doing at this moment? Can you become aware of your thought? The quality of it, the texture, the flavor of it. I find it fascinating that a human being is qualified to be able to do so. To just be able to kind of smell and sense the thought. I was like, I see what's going on inside of me. What you are practicing is the essence of mindfulness at that moment. And that is what I'm teaching to my patient, to my client, as they walk away. Because the tendency to be sucked into the old patterns, the negative maladaptive patterns, the downward spirals are always going to be there. The circumstances are always going to be there. And people think, whether meditators or patients, that somehow something's going to happen, a miracle is going to happen, and the triggers are no longer going to be there. Well, no. The triggers are always going to be there, depending on the past experiences you've endured, you've gone through, the trauma perhaps you've experienced. It is our own understanding and behavior, our own attitudes towards these triggers that distinguish a Buddhist practitioner from a regular patujana, which is an uninstructed worldling, which is what the Buddha used for people who were not there yet. So it's our attitudes towards the same things. Now the sneaky part of Mara that I mentioned comes in when the mind starts saying, okay, I got to get myself out of this one, because it doesn't like discomfort. And every time you are facing the same old negative patterns, guess what's going to happen? The mind is going to put its own version of it, new version, new colorations on it. And that is going to be using another set of concepts, fabrications of concepts, for you to later on say, yeah, okay, I give up. Okay, fine, I'm not going to sit today. Oh, okay, I'm actually going to break the precept. Fine, I'll make up for it tomorrow. Or, no, I'm just going to go ahead and get angry at this person. Even though I'm aware that I'm getting angry. See, that's my good, yes, I'm in. Because I'm aware of my anger. Haha, job done. All of these inner narratives, these dialogues, discussions, actually monologues, are just there for us to tie our own shoelaces together and fall on our faces. And we've been doing that, according to this tradition, for eons. So how long do we carry on like this? It's up to us. It's up to us. The Buddha never came to save anybody. This is what many people don't understand. He came, found, rediscovered the Dhamma, and offered it to us. He explained it in such exquisite, detailed manner so anyone could be able to actually listen, given the time of day, be able to actually really find the truth for themselves. Last year I was in pilgrimage in India with a group of meditators for about 3 weeks straight, going to these marvelous and beautiful places that had so much energy to them. I highly recommend. It wasn't the discomfort of the tiny little beds for 6'5". It's kind of hard, especially if the mattresses are this thin and you're sleeping on like plywood some cases, or half your body is kind of floating on, sinking on these. So it's visual is pretty. Or the food, this and that. So sometimes it's quite bland. And it's come on. I was in a very fortunate position compared to other pilgrims from other eras. Some of them never made it back. None of those things bothered me. Lack of sleep, no. It's when some of these meditators, and some of them have been meditating for over 40 years, turned to me and with a smirk on their faces when it came out to the conversation went to, because we would read in the buses, we would read suttas, and at the end of the suttas, it usually has the saying, statement that, and after the Lord Buddha finished his discourse, 50 listeners attained Sotapanna, 25 attained Anagami, or etc., and some attained Arahantship. And I was hurt when I saw several times, or seen and witnessed this, people just smirking and saying, yeah, again, yeah. It's like, yeah, sure. Nobody attains arahantship like that. Nobody attains enlightenment or nibbana. So it's obviously cultural, historic thing. Wow. Is that what we've come down to? That stoop down that low? Coming across the Dhamma? Then why are we even doing it? Why is that client coming over to me if they don't understand the value and the practice and believe in its effectiveness of this tool that I gave them? That I know it works? So that's what I am leaving you with today. Having the audacity to live a courageous life, especially when it comes to this practice, because this practice has everything to do with your life. Everything to do with our lives. And you might believe it, you might understand it, you might have a very strong conviction of rebirth, the next life or the one after, that's fine. You might not, that's fine too. But what you have is this moment, this life, and we're all getting older, if we're lucky. We're not getting hit by a bus and, whatever. We're experiencing pain, we're experiencing suffering, we're experiencing loss. How much of an evidence do we need in order for us to kind of look at the Four Noble Truths seriously and not just recite them by heart? And that's what the Buddha said before he died, closed his eyes for the last time. He said, as long as the Eightfold Path is available, the teaching of it. As long as there are people who are able to explain the Eightfold Path in detail, and most importantly, as long as there are people who are able to practice the Eightfold Path, the world will never be short of enlightened, fully enlightened arahants. You don't have to take my word for it. You can turn your own lives into the laboratory that manifests the data, the observable data in everyday life that demonstrate this. This week, I found myself in a position where a gentleman approached me and on the street and said, some mean things to me. And he was after getting me startled enough to actually get into a fight with him. He was also a tall, big gentleman. And I looked at his eyes, and he was intent. He was just going by the drive that he was experiencing in him, whatever he might have experienced before meeting me, etc. And I checked in with myself, my emotions, my feelings, to see what was happening in my mind. And the tranquility of the mind is the most important thing to check in with. There's nothing more valuable than your tranquility of mind, because it brings forth all the other virtues. And I decided to, after I tried to reason it, I saw that it wasn't going to happen. I wasn't going to reason with him, and he was intent. The light turned green for the crosswalk, and I started walking, and I said, perhaps it's time for you to walk in the other direction. And he still kept walking towards where I had parked my car. I was checking in with my feelings, and also you're checking in to see where, you have to have the safety and security and all that, and you're thinking about all these things. But again, I'm coming back to right effort. It was so easy for me to be pulled into that world that was being offered to me at that moment. And I just smiled and I looked at him and I said, I'm going to get into my car now and I'm going to drive away, and I wish you a most wonderful day. Now this man was so blinded by his emotions for whatever reason. He goes, what? What did you say? I turned to him, and as I was getting into my car, and I looked over, and I said, I wish you have a wonderful day. And he was stunned. He just how would he, what's the normal reaction to that? And he was just frozen in his steps. I got into my car and I drove off. It's hard, folks. It's hard. Because we still have this body. We have these emotions. We have these anusayas, or latent tendencies. The three defilements are there, always trying to pop their heads at any type of convenient occasion. In those moments when it becomes really difficult, and all of us go through similar things, if not worse. When you see a loved one in pain and you just want to go scream, you don't want them to be in pain, but it is going to happen. If we're born, we're going to die. And in between, there's suffering all over. So let's not fool ourselves that we can actually sugarcoat that. And have fun with just enjoying the fruits of that effort. Because it is your own liberation. This path is about liberation. You're not stuck. The Buddha did not just teach dukkha, he taught the third noble truth as well, the cessation of dukkha. Let's not forget that. And like my teacher, Dr. Guruge, used to say, when we don't practice, it's like having cancer or some very bad disease or illness and going to the doctor, and the doctor writes you a prescription, and you go to the next Kinko store and you make it bigger and bigger and bigger. You make it into a billboard and you carry it over your head and say, I have the cure for my illness. Thank you very much. That's not going to make the dukkha, the suffering, go away. You will die without becoming free from that. Are you okay with that decision? With that intention? Are you willing to do something about it? That was the challenge that the Buddha left us with when he presented us the Dhamma. And that is what I am actually trying to hint at. Thank you for listening. Bante,
That's all.
I know, it's not working, that one, so I just... Oh, that